Esta é uma imagem que remonta à comunidade quilombola do Camburi no início do século XX. Trata-se de uma comunidade formada por escravizados e ex-escravizados vindos de Ubatuba ou Paraty, indígenas carapeva, caiçaras e pescadores que tentaram se desconectar da civilização do progresso, buscando seus próprios modos de ser e estar no mundo, compreendendo a terra como um bem comum, em harmonia com o entorno. A calmaria das ondas parece trazer paz, mas entre as águas e a civilização, cidades, estradas, máquinas, produtos, tubulações, portos e um povo em meio a um território em constante disputa cultural, social e étnica. São muitas as linhas que atravessam a história dessa comunidade, são muitos conflitos que a perpassam, e para compreender essas conexões, precisamos ligar alguns pontos não lineares dessa história. Nessas águas turvas, todos os caminhos levam para o mar.
The Quilombola community of Camburi is located in southeastern Brazil, in a tropical region close to a dense forest. They inhabit a forest park area in the city of Ubatuba, in the state of São Paulo. Its historical background has deep relationships with the slave regime that prevailed in Brazil until the end of the 19th century. The isolation of the region, greatly facilitated by its natural characteristics, led this community to inhabit the place. The community has always thought to isolate itself, living in its own way through subsistence what nature provided. Interestingly, we are talking about two places with names of indigenous origin. Ubatuba, the name of the city in Tupi, means a place reaching Ubá, a type of canoe used by the Indians, and Camburi. In the Tupi-Guarani it means sea bass fish. Interesting to note how the waters are part of the history of this place. The origin of the name of these territories refers to the way of being of the people who live there, in harmony with the waters. Their paths to transit through the territory. But with the process of new occupations, many changes came, and its roots ceased to be natural, giving way to new constructions, leaving these peoples on the sidelines, and at the service of this new civilization in progress. Before the arrival of Portuguese settlers, the region was occupied by the Tupinambá ethnic group. This group occupied practically the entire Brazilian coast from the Recôncavo Baiano to the coast of São Paulo. They have an intimate relationship with the land. They lived off artisanal fishing, hunting, gathering food in the forest, collecting crabs in the mangroves and oysters in the sea. The ethnic group has a deep knowledge of medicinal plants, in addition to practicing traditional cultivation systems such as slash and burn, cutting and burning, mainly for the cultivations of tubers such as cassava. Currently, the food base of the population residing in the coastal strip of Serra do Mar is strongly influenced by the eating habits of the Tupinambás. In the year 1500, Portuguese colonists landed in Brazil, and during the 16th and 17th centuries, the region was widely exploited, mainly due to the predatory extraction of pau-brasil, a very resistant tree used in construction and as a red dye for fabrics. The Terra Brasilis, as a new colony of Portugal, became known, had its name linked to the exploitation of pau-brasil. To carry out this system of occupation and exploitation, the Portuguese government divided the Brazilian territory into a system known as capitanias hereditárias, strips of territory given to nobles of the Portuguese court, designated to explore the territory and conquer wealth for the families and for the royal court of Portugal. These 12 nobles were expected to colonize, populate, and develop the economy of each territory in exchange for sovereign authority. The region of Ubatuba is part of what at the time corresponded to the captaincy of São Vicente, one of the few that not only prospered, but was the main access route for the colonizers to the interior of Brazil. Until then, the occupation took place along the coast. The 18th century in Brazil is strongly marked by the exploration of gold in the region of Minas Gerais and later in Goiás. By routes coming from the captaincy of São Vicente, the colonizers penetrated the interior of Brazil and found in the most mountainous regions an unimaginable amount of precious metals and precious stones. The news of the discovery quickly spread, and several groups were interested in coming to Brazil to explore and enrich themselves. At the moment, the Portuguese crown created several control and taxation strategies to profit and not lose possession of these riches. The first major port for the flow of these minerals and precious stones is in the neighboring city of the Ubatuba region, Paraty, in the state of Rio de Janeiro. Thus, at the moment, the coastal region of Brazil became a great place for the external flow of gold production and for the entry of enslaved peoples from Africa. Forms of exploration of the territory began to emerge. São Paulo farms began to introduce coffee production. For this, the entire region of dense Atlantic forest undergoes a process of severe devastation. The extensive fields of coffee production began to take over the landscape for international export. Some technological equipment began to emerge in the century, such as the implementation of paved roads that facilitated transportation. However, due to the continued adoption of slave labor, little has changed in terms of production technology. The deactivation of the old Camburi coffee farm marks the beginning of Quilombo in 1855. The farm that gave rise to this first settlement was a subsistence farm, production sugarcane and finally coffee, until they were deactivated. It's important to point out that Brazil was one of the last countries to officially abolish slavery after the Golden Law of 1888, signed by Princess Isabel. Studies indicate that until approximately 1960, Camburi was a community of caiçaras who lived basically from what they planted for their own consumption. The production surplus was sold in Ubatuba and Paraty in exchange for manufactured products. There they sold dried fish, flour, potatoes, and sweet potatoes, which were transported by canoe or along the existing trails inside the forest. In fishing, they employed various techniques such as the net, inherited from the indigenous people, the caseio, of Portuguese origin and which requires 3 fishermen to be carried out, and the picaré, suitable for small fish and fast fishing. In all these variations, the long line is used, a long rope to hold the hooks and different types of nets. They observe the position and shape of the clouds to determine the direction of the wind. They also watch the moon to orient themselves at sea. This natural knowledge allowed them to know when it was advisable to enter the sea, which guaranteed their safety. In the 1960s, with the construction of the Rio Santos Highway, this way of life began to change, as the region became one of the most prominent tourist destinations in the southeastern Brazil, receiving visitors from the 3 most populous states in the country, in addition to other regions and countries. This change in the local reality ended up altering the social and cultural dynamics. Recently, with the increase in the volume of rains, with the alteration of the hydrological cycles, this community that had already been suffering a process of social-cultural destabilization starts to suffer impacts from landslides, water unfit for consumption and human use, reduction in the number of native species, food, and impacts on fishing practices. In the 20th century, other social spatial changes took place in the territory of Camburi, with a process of land expropriation and the removal of Quilombola and Caiçara communities from the region. It is said that around 80% of the central, flat beach part of the Camburi community was fraudulently bought by 2 real estate investors. As a result, the community had to move to more inclined, highly and mountainous areas of the region or to the urban areas of Ubatuba, putting the lives of these populations at risk. With the arrival of these new residents, mainly the new wealthy landowners, the workers who provided services also came. These workers came to inhabit the Quilombo de Camburi region and are identified by former residents as outsiders. 2 conflicts began to take shape at the moment, the first with the new owners and the second with the outsiders. The 21st century brought some transformations to the Camburi community. Despite having lost extensive areas of land they inhabited, in 2006, the Quilombo was registered with the Palmares Foundation. It is important to highlight that in Brazil, as of the 1988 Constitution, and mainly as of the Decree 48887 of 2003, identified Quilombola communities began to have a special regime for the protection, demarcation, and possession of their lands. Despite the transformations that impact on the community's eating habits and practices, some characteristics of the cultural food base of these people still persist, their food base being rice, beans, fish, cassava flour, and banana. The community reports that some fish species are disappearing and are no longer found in the region. The group maintains some traditional fishing techniques, making nets and baskets to store food, but this is increasingly rare. Roads, tourism, real estate speculation, progress as a whole have altered their ways of dealing with this territory. The old fishing ranches give way to bars to serve tourists. The clear waters start to be contaminated, generating disease. Even the relationship with time has changed. If before the right time for planting and harvesting was expected, the direction of the winds was known and the relationship with the moon for fishing, today the calendar is marked by holidays, waiting for tourists, their livelihood, and the new way of life. In addition to these territorial conflicts, between parks, between the Rio Santos Highway, between the uncertainties of their own territory with new configurations, the resurgence of the community are cornered, living on dangerous slopes. uncertain terrain on the point of collapsing at any moment. Science in recent decades, heavy rains and their drastic consequences announced that catastrophes have become increasingly frequent.
Retomamos ao mar, a uma imagem turística, convidativa, ao balanço de suas águas, à promessa do paraíso, e diante desse Eldorado, nos questionamos: quem tem direito a esse território?
O povo que planta e pesca, canta, dança e faz festa no seu pedaço de chão,
abastece a sua mesa, agradece a natureza em qualquer religião.
seu lugar,
Seu oratório.
tirar seu território é calar a
Da tradição. Apesar das mudanças climáticas, o quilombo ainda resiste.
Resistência